Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them was released in 2016 and was directed by David Yates and was written by J.K. Rowling and stars Eddie Redmayne, Catherine Waterston, Dan Fogler, and Alison Sudol. The film follows the adventures of writer Newt Scamander in New York's secret community of witches and wizards 70 years before the events of Harry Potter. I've been wanting to talk about the Fantastic Beasts films for a while, and now with all 3 of the originally planned 5 films having been out for some time now, I thought it would be best to end my look at the Harry Potter franchise by also looking at these films as well. Now, if you look back at some of my older reviews, I did review one of these films, the second one, Crimes of Grindelwald, when it released in 2018. But other than that, I haven't touched the first or third films. The Fantastic Beasts films are a very interesting failure in the Wizarding World franchise because you start out with such promise with the first one, which made good money, was generally well received, and then afterwards the series is met with negative reviews, bad press, problematic actors, and at the center of it, J.K. Rowling, who has done permanent damage to her reputation. And on top of all of that, with the mix of a dwindling box office for these films and the mixed critical reception, the series was put to an early end with its third movie instead of the 5 films that were originally planned. And to me, that's heartbreaking to see a promising series falter like this. But you want to know something? I'm a bit of a defender of these films. I don't love all aspects of them, but I do find a lot about them that's underrated and underappreciated. And when it comes to specifically the final 2 films, I think people have just joined together to collectively say they're not good, rather than really looking. Because there's good in all of these films. And as a channel that wants to focus more positively on film, I think these movies are a perfect example to look at. But before we get into my thoughts on the first film, let's go behind the scenes to see just how this film was made. The book from which the movie gets its title is mentioned several times in the Harry Potter book series as a school textbook written by Newt Scamander. In 2001, Rowling published an edition of the In-World textbook to be sold to raise money for the British charity Comic Relief. In September of 2013, just 2 years after the release of Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 2, it was announced that Fantastic Beasts would be turned into a spin-off film for the Harry Potter franchise, with Rowling making her screenwriting debut with producer David Heyman returning. It was initially rumored that Alfonso Cuarón would direct, but he would deny this in May of 2014. Later, it was announced that David Yates, the director of the previous 4 Harry Potter films, would return to direct the first film in the initially planned trilogy. Principal photography began on August 17th of 2015 at Warner Brothers Studios, Leavesden in England, and wrapped in January of 2016. Several scenes were shot on location in London. After 2 months, the production moved to Connard Building and St. George's Hall in Liverpool, which was transformed into 1920s New York City. On April 9th, 2016, the film's website announced James Newton Howard would be the composer for the film and would incorporate John Williams' themes from the movies into the main theme for this film. The visual effects for the film would be done by several different studios, including Cinesight, DNEG, Frame Store, Image Engine, Moving Picture Company, Milk VFX, and Rodeo FX. Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them had its world premiere at Alice Tully Hall in New York City on November 10th, 2016, and was released worldwide on the 18th. The movie would go on to gross $814 million at the worldwide box office on a budget of around $200 million, making it a huge financial success. Reviews for the film were generally favorable, praising the characters and craftsmanship in the film, but felt the film does get bogged down with exposition, and others believed there was little magical about the film, and the effects were too bland to be exhilarating. The movie would go on to be the first Wizarding World film to win an Oscar for Best Costume Design at the Academy Awards. Due to the success of the film and the early buzz surrounding its release, it was announced that the planned trilogy for the series would be upped to 5 films, with Rowling writing all of them. Sadly, though, due to poor box office returns on the 2 sequels, the series was cut short. Now, with all of that out of the way, let's go into my thoughts on the film. I'll come right out and say that I think Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them is one of the most underrated films of this franchise. I think it's so easy to do this with every prequel that comes out. I will say, it's hard to recapture the magic of those Harry Potter films because we grew up with them. They're basically tied to us. But if you've been following my reviews for all the films, you should notice that I don't think all of them are great, and even some of the best ones are more flawed than people will admit. But I wanted to look at those films without the rose-tinted glasses, and that's what I want to do with these films. There was no way these films were ever going to reach the heights of what came before, but they didn't have to. That said, I think Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them reestablishes, for me, the magic of those earlier films, and might not be my favorite David Yates film overall, but I think is still his best showcase as a director. Fantastic Beasts, for me, brings back the magic I felt when watching the first 2 films, and not in the way you might think, because in terms of look and feel, they are very different movies. But I think it is actually having J.K. Rowling as the screenwriter that helps this movie. It's just a whimsical ride from beginning to end, and as someone who has recently been rereading the Harry Potter books, this feels the most like a tried and true adaptation of Rowling's world. It feels like the worlds we see when we read Roald Dahl's work, which is a writer that Rowling has always been compared to. And I think that's really why this movie feels the way it does, because it has the creator's hands in it and feels familiar to what has come before in the movies, but is a whole lot more magical, like how I prefer the first 2 Harry Potter movies in terms of style for this world. There's magic everywhere compared to the last couple of films where the color and magic seem to just be stripped out entirely. And those last couple films always feel so jarring compared to what came before. But here it's just magical seeing how this new wizarding world works, seeing the magic and falling in love with new characters. That's another thing I think this movie handles really well, and that is making new endearing characters that I think are worth getting invested into. Newt Scamander is a great change of pace from Harry Potter. He's shy, awkward, and can never seem to look people in the eye, and I have some inklings that Newt's character is meant to have some mild form of autism, which I think is cool to have for a main character. But, of course, I'm not really sure if that's what we're supposed to infer, or it's just one of his funny quirks. Still, I find this character very likable, and Eddie Redmayne is perfect in this role. He brings a lot of charisma, and besides Les Miserables, this is the role I most associate him with. But we also have other great supporting players, like No-Maj Jacob Kowalski, played by Dan Fogler, who ends up being my favorite character of this trilogy. I think it was such a smart idea to have one of the leading characters be a non-magical person who is seeing the wizarding world for the first time, and is at first frightened by it, but by the end falls in love with it. Dan Fogler is just so charming, and he and Eddie Redmayne have such great chemistry together on screen that they make the perfect friends. Jacob's also just a very sympathetic character, and you want his bakery shop he wants to open to succeed. Then you have Catherine Waterston and Alison Sudol as Tina and Queenie Goldstein that work as our leading guys as love interests, and they're so distinctly different from each other, and they're just so well performed. Waterston brings a lot of depth to her character, being someone who has been punished for trying to do the right thing by helping these children who are abused by their adoptive mother, who leads a cult meant to prove the existence of witches and wizards in New York City and eradicate them. And her relationship with Newt is so cute and awkward as you expect, as they clearly develop feelings for each other, but neither one can seem to tell the other. And Queenie is just a ray of sunshine, if I can use that cliche line for a moment. She's so eccentric and otherworldly and exudes the feeling of a femme fatale. But her relationship with Jacob is kind of the heart of the film, as in the US magical and non-magical peoples are not allowed to mix. There's other characters I could quickly go over, such as Colin Farrell as Percival Graves, and Auror, who acts as our main antagonist for the film, and it's just a joy seeing Colin Farrell, and maybe it has something to do with him being my favorite actor, but he's just great and intimidating in this film, and the mystery around what he wants is intriguing. And Samantha Morton as Mary Lou Barebone is also an intriguing character who runs a group called the Second Salemers, who wish to expose and kill witches and wizards. She is pure evil and very unlikable and kind of a fun villain. And the idea that there are non-magical people out there trying to expose wizardkind is a fascinating idea that I'm glad is explored here. And the last person I'll talk about is the elephant in the room, Ezra Miller, as Credence Barebone, who is this meek and very troubled adopted son of Mary Lou Barebone, who is actually a wizard that has held back their magic for so long under fear by this mother that he has become an obscurial, which, when unleashed, causes chaos and violence everywhere. This is such an interesting and very sad idea, and Ezra Miller actually plays this troubled soul so well, and you have so much empathy for the character. I found it very heartbreaking in the final moments of the film where Newt and Tina are trying to calm Credence down, in particular effective. But what about the fantastic beasts that the title boasts? Well, the film is filled with them, and it becomes the main crux of the movie as Newt's magical creatures he's collected escape into New York City, and he has to try to rescue them with the help of his new friends. And this is where the lighthearted magical moments really shine, and we see creatures we had only read about in the books brought vividly to life, and these scenes are so much fun, especially with the Niffler, who has a hankering for stealing gold and jewels, or Newt trying to tame a giant rhino-like magical creature. Each is unique and I think wonderfully brought to life. And speaking of things being wonderfully brought to life, 1920s New York City is the perfect setting for the film. It feels old world and fresh, and I think getting away from the modern aesthetic of the Harry Potter films helps this one stand out more and brings a new kind of magic. I love how the sets and the world looks. You feel transported like never before. Match that with the gorgeous cinematography by Philippe Rousselot, who also provided the cinematography for the second film in the trilogy, as well as the cinematography for some of my favorite movies, such as Big Fish and Interview with the Vampire, and you have, in my opinion, the best looking Wizarding World film since Goblet of Fire. The music can also not be ignored. James Newton Howard's score is the best we have seen since John Williams provided his final score in Prisoner of Azkaban. But I think this score matches and even complements a lot of the themes we see in the first two films. There's a lightness and a warmth to them that feels so comforting. My favorite themes being the main theme, and interestingly enough, Jacob's theme, which I think says everything you need to know about his character without saying anything. I also want to bring up how well this movie's opening is at setting things up through visual storytelling. Yates introduced a great way to do exposition in Order of the Phoenix by use of a montage of showing various headlines from the Daily Prophet newspaper. And that's how this film starts out, and if you look carefully, it sets up many little details and even some small ones that will show up later in the film, such as Grindelwald causing havoc, no one knowing where he is, the second Salemers in New York, the magical politics of the US, and even a reference to giggle water, which is used for a joke in the film. It's a creative and inventive way of doing exposition that works rather well. I think this movie is so underappreciated. I think it has so much style and fun characters and world building that it doesn't get put into the same conversation as the Harry Potter films because nobody has nostalgia for this one. But I think it can easily stand on its own and had the potential to be a very compelling series. And I would argue that it mostly was, even as the weaker parts of the writing began to seep into the next two films. But I love this movie. I love its opening and its resolution. I love new characters, the world, the music, and I even love the directing. David Yates is a director I have a lot to say about because of how inconsistently he has directed all his Wizarding World films, especially the Harry Potter films. But this is the first time I feel like I've seen some passion behind the camera from him since his very different approach he took with Order of the Phoenix, which is why I think that movie works so well and is definitely one of the best and most underrated of the Harry Potter films. The ending of this film is also very satisfying and points at more adventures to come. And though the reveal of Grindelwald is satisfying and set up at the beginning of the film, I think the reveal of Johnny Depp in the movie's closing moments is just kind of distracting because you see the actor before you see the character in my eyes. But how they resolve everything and the whole situation of how to obliviate all of New York City is clever and satisfying. And seeing Jacob say goodbye to everyone as he is obliviated to is really sad, honestly. But I think the movie ends perfectly, focusing on his bakery and seeing Queenie as he quickly begins to remember the events of the film. But I love this film. It brings magic back into the Wizarding World and expands it in a way the Harry Potter films before it couldn't. It only falters for me in some of the writing. Rowling is a book writer first and a screenwriter second, and there's parts in this film that feel like fluff. Mainly things to do with the politics in New York and John Voight's character and his son. But this is a really small complaint, and the film can get bogged down with exposition. But other than that, I think this is a great film, and I think should be recognized as one of the Wizarding World's very best efforts. So, with all that said, I'm going to get Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them an 8 out of 10. I hope with time this film is appreciated more, but only time will tell. I'm so glad I got to finally talk about this film and give it its due, and I'm excited to look back at the last two films in this trilogy, which are not as well liked, and I'm ready to have a final opinion on them for you guys. But look forward to those reviews coming in the next months, and as always, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel, and stay positive.